Look at that. You're watching the History Channel.
Join us on location as we shed light on one of the most misunderstood periods in history.
We got the camera covered in blood this time, but this is nothing. This is the Dark Ages.
Stand by, Pasirosham.
They need to look like they've been starving for weeks.
Roll camera.
My name is Chris Castle. I'm the director and producer of The Dark Ages. In 2004, I did Rome, Engineering, and Empire. My follow-up to that was Egypt, Engineering, and Empire, which just aired recently on the History Channel. And now, to sort of make it a hat trick of marquee specials, I'm working on The Dark Ages. And the Dark Ages are subject to debate about exactly when they started and when they finished. Some people say there were no Dark Ages. A lot of scholars just refer to it as the early Middle Ages because they feel like the Dark Ages is actually an insult to the period because it wasn't as dark, some people think, as the term implies, but there certainly was a dark side to it.
Let's have the stunt guys take 2 steps forward.
The period that we're focusing on begins roughly with the sacking of Rome in 410. We follow it from there through the complete destruction of the Roman Empire into a period of amazing depths of despair and violence and economic misery and poverty and starvation and plague and all kinds of things that you would expect the Dark Ages to be. It's turned out to be, to me, a more riveting and more thrilling period of history than Rome.
As with many historical periods, what happens is often overshadowed by whom it happened to. And the Dark Ages is no different.
The Dark Ages is just ripe with these hidden gems of history that nobody's aware of and these characters that have been kind of lost. And I'm excited to bring them back to life.
The biggest challenge in shooting this is just, it's such an ambitious scope of time periods and locations and characters. So in order to make everything kind of look and feel big enough, as sort of epic as it deserves, it's been a challenge. And also just to do everything on this schedule, because we have a very ambitious schedule too, and we're going really, really fast.
When someone gives you the task of saying, here, give us a 2-hour show on 600 or 700 years of history, it's a little bit daunting. So once you have 8 or 9 characters that are really compelling, that signify different pieces of the story you want to tell, and really sort of develop into something great.
In addition to the characters, you need to get the setting right.
It's gonna be a little rougher, a little dirtier, grittier.
But finding a location to double as pre-Middle Ages Europe is tricky.
We're in Vilnius, Lithuania. This is the city behind me, and it's where we're shooting our recreations for the show.
Can we switch so that this is on this shoulder?
Lithuania has a great studio that we're working with and a production services company. It has great resources and great crew people and great actors, and it's kind of a one-stop shop.
Americans coming here and shooting here, this started maybe 10 years ago, maybe even earlier than that. So it's nothing unusual, nothing very different from all the rest of the shoots here. It's always Dark Ages or medieval or 16th century. We're lacking modern films. If you put all the movies that are shot in Vilnius together and you see them at once, you would definitely recognize that corner, that corner.
I've had a great experience shooting in Lithuania. It's great locations. The crew has been really great, and everyone's really enthusiastic.
The Dark Ages were an especially bloody period of European history. Barbarians sacking Rome, legions of people dying from plague, cruel and unusual forms of punishment. What is a filmmaker to do?
Blood.
Blood.
A lot of blood.
We had the luxury of having a special effects maestro on this show who helped us to bring some of these scenes a little bit more realism. We have a scene where we have someone impaled with a sword. We have another scene where a guy gets hit with an arrow. We have a scene where a horse falls in the midst of battle.
We got the camera covered in blood this time, but this is nothing. You should have been here 2 weeks ago. We killed a guy. We opened his stomach, pulled out his lungs. I had them all over my pants, the lung juice, intestines, everywhere. It's good stuff.
Smoke, background fires, things like that. We've had a few featured gags, more, big bonfires. So we had a prisoner in a dungeon that was forced to have his hand go into boiling water. Looked pretty good. People tend to think of special effects as blowing up a building or blowing up a car or something along those lines. In virtually every shot in every film you've ever seen, there was an effects guy working, if not just atmospheric smoke. There's more to it than people give credit for.
It's a combination of the special effects and the stunt team, both of which have done a great job to bring these battle scenes to life. And also smaller scenes like what we're going to do now with, blood rolling down a cobblestone street during the sacking of Rome. It's great to have someone on hand that can do that for us and give us smoke when we need it, fire when we need it. We shot this big scene where there was piles of sort of village rubble all over, all burning, all smoking, and this army marching through the middle of it. And, so we've been able to shoot things on a scale that we haven't in the past.
For the dramatic reenactments, we have gone with an interesting look. It's a very desaturated color palette, and we're going with a very gritty feel. Sometimes it gets very dark, and I know the Dark Ages were not all dark, but sometimes we get into really dark corners, dark rooms, using a lot of smoke and texture.
When shooting dramatic recreations, the History Channel tries especially hard to make the situation as close to what it may have originally been like as possible. Holding real swords, spears, and weapons, it is easy for an actor or a crew member to get caught up in the action.
There was one time that was kind of scary. We were shooting the Battle of Tours on the first week here, and there was the Moors on horses. There was a few horses on the Frank side, and everybody had spears and swords and everything. And I was in the middle of that, handheld with the camera. And you can only control these extras to a point, but once they got the swords and they're all fired up, they're not looking where the camera is. And so I was just like, trying to dodge. It was a little scary.
Lithuanian, like many Eastern European languages, is not derived from Latin like English or French. Instead, it is a Baltic Slavic language, making it especially difficult for American tongues.
The language barrier has been interesting. I usually try to learn a little bit of the language every place I go, but this place has been a little tough. I have learned some words. Ačiū is the first one, is thank you. Along with ačiū comes the phrase in Russian, za ačiū ne postrojiš dačiu. You can't build a house with thank yous.
They don't call action here. They basically tell you, depending on what the scene is, to either work, walk, ride if you're on a horse. So it starts out with Bashir Hashem, which I believe is attention, and then they say dir maso, which is get ready, ir dirbaum, which means and work. So instead of action, they say and work, or if it's walk, they say einam, and if it's ride, they say yoyam. So we've had a lot of fun with those. There's so many things about the Dark Ages that nobody knows, and everyone I talk to is like, well, I really don't know anything about the Dark Ages. One of the greatest characters of any age was Empress Theodora, and she was the co-ruler of the Byzantine Empire during the age of her husband Justinian. And what's famous about Justinian is that he tried to reunite the eastern and the western halves of the empire about 120 years after the sacking of Rome, and succeeded to a great degree. And for another 40 years, suddenly the Roman Empire was back, and he had conquered all, the Western Mediterranean basin again. And her story is this rags to riches tale of a girl who started out in poverty, and through sort of a combination of sex appeal and brains and ambition, she rose to become the co-ruler of the greatest empire in the world. That's the real story, is the characters. And this show just jumps off the set with action, with huge characters, with conquest, with disaster, with sex. Everything a storyteller could hope for. And it's action-packed, I promise.
Beginning with the sack of Rome, the center of the civilized world at the time, continuing through the first millennia, was a period of European history in such transition that it can only be called the Dark Ages.